The termination letter was already signed, and sitting in the hospital's HR department when Adrian Mercer walked out of Whitmore Medical Center for the last time, carrying nothing but a worn canvas tote bag and a small paper drawing his 8-year-old son had tucked into his jacket pocket that morning, a crayon sketch of the two of them standing in front of a house, with a yellow door, the sun impossibly large and round above their heads. Behind him, the corridor buzzed with the kind of whispers that travel fast in institutions built on hierarchy. Some said he had finally cracked under pressure. Others said it was only a matter of time, that a man who kept leaving early to pick up his kid was never really serious about the job. A few younger nurses watched him go with something that looked almost like envy. But none of them knew what Adrian knew. None of them had been standing in the parking garage at 6:47 on a Tuesday evening, reading a voicemail transcript, because the noise of the city made it impossible to hear, watching the words appear one by one on his screen. "Mr. Mercer, this is Ridgeview Aftercare calling. Just a reminder that our pickup cutoff is 7 p.m. Noah has been asking for you since 5 o'clock. He wanted us to tell you he saved you the last juice box." That was the fourth such message in 3 weeks. Adrian had been a respiratory therapist at Whitmore Medical for 11 years. Not a doctor, not an executive, not anyone whose name appeared in press releases or donor plaques. He was the man called in at 2 in the morning when a ventilator alarm wouldn't stop, the one who sat with terrified patients during their first night on oxygen, and explained, slowly and without condescension, exactly what each machine was doing, and why. He was the one who remembered that the elderly man in room 14 preferred his mask adjusted slightly to the left because of an old jaw injury, and who wrote that detail in the margin of his chart so every night shift colleague would know. He was good at his job the way certain people are good at things without needing anyone to tell them so. Quietly, completely, and without asking for credit. His wife, Meredith, had died 22 months earlier. Ovarian cancer diagnosed late, progressed fast. She was 37. Noah had just turned 6. The year that followed was the kind of year that doesn't leave fingerprints so much as it rewires you entirely. Adrian learned to braid hair, using YouTube tutorials at midnight, learned which brand of mac and cheese Noah would eat, and which ones he'd push to the edge of the bowl and stare at with open suspicion, learned that grief in a child doesn't look the way grief looks in adults. It comes in strange places. At a birthday party, suddenly, without warning. In the cereal aisle at the grocery store, because Meredith used to let Noah pick the box. He kept working. What else do you do? He kept working, and he asked his sister to cover pickups 3 days a week, and he put Noah in aftercare. And he told himself the sacrifice was temporary, that things would stabilize, that a promotion would come, and with it some flexibility, some breathing room, some life. The promotion went to a man named Garrett, who had been at the hospital for 4 years, and who was, as far as Adrian could tell, primarily skilled at speaking confidently in meetings about ideas that other people had developed. That was 18 months ago. The thing that finally broke it, not snapped it, broke it. The way something breaks when it has been bent too many times in the same direction. Was not the voicemail. The voicemail was just the last one in a long sequence. What broke it was the expression on Noah's face when Adrian arrived at Ridgeview at 6:58 that evening, to find his son sitting alone at a small table near the entrance, backpack already on, hands folded in his lap. Every other child had gone home. The aide on duty was trying her best to seem casual, scrolling through her phone, with the studied nonchalance of someone pretending not to notice an 8-year-old, who had been sitting in the same position for nearly 2 hours. Noah looked up when Adrian came through the door. He didn't cry, he didn't complain, he just looked at his father with an expression that no 8-year-old should have, patient, careful, practiced, and said, "I knew you'd come. I told Ms. Delgado you always come." The drive home was quiet. They stopped for gas. Noah asked if they could get a hot dog from the roller rack inside, the kind that had been there since the beginning of time and would probably be there at the end of it. Adrian said yes. They ate hot dogs in the parking lot in the dark, and Noah told him a long involved story about a disagreement he'd had at recess, involving a contested boundary line in a 4-square game, and Adrian listened and asked follow-up questions with his whole chest, and the entire time he was sitting there with mustard on his sleeve. He was also somewhere else entirely, sitting with a decision he had already made, but hadn't yet said out loud. That night, after Noah fell asleep, Adrian wrote his resignation. He didn't send it immediately. He sat with it for 2 days, opened it, revised a sentence, closed it again. He thought about his pension. He thought about Noah's school and the neighborhood they lived in, and the particular way the mortgage payment arrived, at the beginning of every month, with the cheerful regularity of something that did not care at all about personal circumstances. He thought about Meredith, about what she would say. She would probably say something practical first, and then something true. He submitted it on a Thursday morning, walked out that afternoon with his canvas tote and his son's drawing, and 11 years of himself distributed invisibly across every room in that building. The hospital's chief operating officer, a woman named Lena Hargrove, found out on Friday. In the medical industry, COOs occupy a particular kind of altitude. Close enough to operations to understand the machinery, far enough removed from it, to occasionally forget that the machinery runs on people. Lena had been appointed 18 months earlier, brought in specifically to restructure the hospital's staffing model and improve efficiency ratios before the next board review. She was 41, unmarried, the kind of person who scheduled her own haircuts 3 months in advance, and kept a running list of every professional debt she had ever called in, and every one she had ever been owed. She was not cruel, that's an important thing to understand. She was not cruel, she was optimized, in the way that people become when they have spent long enough in environments that reward optimization. She had never learned Adrian Mercer's name, specifically. She knew the respiratory therapy department the way she knew every department, as a line item, a headcount, a cost-per-outcome ratio. When HR forwarded her the resignation, she noted it, forwarded a copy to the department head, and moved on. 4 days later, she stood in the middle of a crisis that changed her mind about a great many things. Whitmore Medical had been piloting a new remote monitoring protocol. A system designed to track high-risk respiratory patients in real time from a central hub, reducing unnecessary readmissions, and theoretically saving the hospital a significant amount of money per quarter. The pilot had been running for 6 months. The data was being prepared for a presentation to 3 potential partner health networks. The kind of presentation that had implications for contracts worth tens of millions of dollars. On the day before the presentation, the monitoring system produced a cascading data error so complete and so thoroughly unfixable by anyone currently on staff that the department head, pale-faced, came to Lena's office at 9 in the morning to inform her that they had a serious problem. The problem was this. The person who had designed the hospital's protocol parameters, who had manually calibrated the alarm thresholds for 47 individual patient profiles, who had written the supplementary documentation that the partner networks were expecting to review. That person had resigned 6 days ago and was currently not answering his work email because he no longer had access to it. It took Lena approximately 40 minutes to understand the full scope of what had happened. Then she closed her office door, sat down, and stared at the middle distance for a while. She pulled Adrian's personnel file, she read through it carefully, which was something she should have done at some point during the previous 18 months, and had not. She read his performance reviews, all marked exceeds expectations, the highest category, every year for a decade. She read the commendations submitted by colleagues, by patients, by 2 attending physicians who had taken the time to write actual paragraphs rather than checkboxes. She read the note he had submitted 14 months ago, requesting a shift adjustment of 90 minutes twice per week to accommodate school pickup, a request that had been denied by his department supervisor on the grounds that it would require schedule changes affecting other staff members. 90 minutes. Twice a week. Lena drove to the address in his file that evening. She did not call ahead. She told herself it was because she needed an answer quickly, and didn't want to give him the opportunity to refuse before she'd had the chance to make her case in person. That was partially true. The neighborhood was in the older part of the city, the kind of area that real estate listings describe as transitional, meaning some blocks were being renovated, and some blocks were waiting their turn. Adrian's building was a 2-story rental complex with a well-maintained front walkway, and a modest little bed of marigolds near the entrance that someone had clearly planted with intention. Lena had worn the wrong shoes. She noticed this when she stepped around a crack in the sidewalk, and felt the heel of her right pump catch slightly. She knocked, there was a pause, the sound of movement inside, and then the door opened, and Adrian Mercer stood there, in a faded green sweatshirt, holding a spatula. Behind him, on the living room floor, Noah sat surrounded by an elaborate city, built from cardboard boxes, toilet paper rolls, and what appeared to be an entire roll of aluminum foil deployed as a river. He had a marker cap in his mouth and was deeply focused on drawing windows onto a skyscraper made from a cereal box. The kitchen smelled like garlic and something frying. A half-finished math worksheet sat on the coffee table beside a stack of library books. Adrian looked at Lena. He recognized her. He said nothing. Noah looked up. He registered a stranger at the door with the frank, uncalculating assessment of a child who has no reason to modulate his reactions yet. Then he said, "Are you Dad's friend from work?" Lena opened her mouth and found she didn't have an immediate answer to that. "I'm from the hospital," she said finally. "I work there." Noah considered this. "My dad fixed all their machines," he said, with the simple confidence of someone reporting a fact. Then he went back to his skyscraper. Adrian stepped out onto the small landing and partially closed the door behind him. His expression was not hostile. It was something more complicated than that. Guarded, but not unkind. He waited. Lena explained the situation. The system error, the presentation, the partner networks, the timeline. She spoke clearly and without embellishment, the way she always spoke. She told him exactly what was at stake. Adrian listened. Then he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I know what's at stake. I'm the one who built it." He said it without satisfaction, just as a fact. He told her he was sorry about the timing, and he meant it. That was the part that unsettled Lena later, when she was driving home and turning the conversation over in her mind. He was actually sorry, not strategic sorry. Not sorry in the way that people are sorry when an apology costs them nothing. He told her the documentation was thorough, and that if she had someone walk through it carefully, they should be able to reconstruct the calibration logic. And then he told her he wasn't coming back. He said it gently, and he said it the way a person says something they have already made peace with. He said that for 3 years he had given the hospital his best hours. Not his paid hours, his best hours, the sharp alert ones before exhaustion set in, and he had given them weekends and on-call nights, and the particular kind of creative problem-solving that you can't schedule or requisition. And during those same 3 years, his son had eaten dinner alone, 4 nights out of 7, had learned to fall asleep with the TV on, because quiet made him nervous, had developed a habit of checking the front window every few minutes after 5 o'clock. "He saves me juice boxes," Adrian said. He was looking at something past Lena's shoulder, somewhere in the middle distance. "He saves me the last juice box every single time, because he thinks, he's 8, he thinks that if he saves it for me it means I'm definitely coming. Like it's a system." He stopped. He looked at her directly. "I can't fix your machines anymore," he said. "I have a more important thing to fix." Lena drove home. She sat in her car in the parking garage of her building for a while before going upstairs. Her apartment was large, and very clean and very quiet. She had a bottle of Bordeaux she'd been saving for a particular occasion, and she opened it that night, without remembering what the occasion was supposed to be, and she poured a glass and sat down at her kitchen island, and tried to think clearly. She thought about Adrian's personnel file, about the decade of exceeds expectations, about the 90-minute shift adjustment that had been denied. She thought about the cereal box skyscraper. She thought about what it meant that the most irreplaceable person in a department of 43 people had lived in a 2-bedroom rental for 11 years and been denied a 90-minute scheduling change. She did not sleep particularly well. The presentation was rescheduled. It cost them one of the 3 partner networks, which sent a polite email indicating they had decided to explore other opportunities. The other 2 agreed to a 30-day extension. The board was displeased. Slana sat in that meeting and received the displeasure directly and professionally, the way she always did, and then she walked back to her office, and did something she had not done in a long time. She sat quietly, and thought about what she actually wanted to fix. She called a meeting with every department head the following morning, and asked a question that had apparently never been asked in quite that way before. What are we doing to people in order to keep the institution running, and is any of it actually necessary? The answers were uncomfortable. She asked follow-up questions. She made people stay past the scheduled hour. Meanwhile, Adrian had started a different kind of life. It wasn't easy, and he wasn't pretending it was. His savings were real but finite. He picked up freelance calibration work. Medical device companies occasionally needed experienced technicians for short contracts, and Adrian had enough of a reputation in the field that the work found him without requiring much searching. He worked mornings, mostly, while Noah was at school. He picked Noah up himself every single afternoon. Not once in 6 weeks did he arrive to find his son sitting alone with his backpack already on. They went to the park, they made elaborate omelets on Saturday mornings and argued genially about fillings. Adrian was pro-spinac, Noah was strongly opposed, and this debate would apparently never be resolved. They drove out to a pumpkin patch one weekend, even though it wasn't quite the season yet, because Noah had heard about it from a friend, and could not be persuaded to wait. The pumpkins were small, and not fully ready, but they came home with 4 of them anyway, and lined them up on the front step, and Noah named each one with great solemnity. One afternoon, Lena saw him. She was at Westfield Medical Supply, a device company, 2 blocks from the hospital. One she'd been in conversation with about a potential partnership, and she was in the parking lot on a phone call, when she noticed a familiar canvas tote bag on a bench near the entrance. And then Adrian himself emerged from the building, talking to a man in a company polo, and the conversation had the easy body language of 2 people who had worked together before and respect each other. She stayed on her phone call and watched. A few minutes later, a school bus pulled up at the corner, and Noah came off it with the purposeful energy of a child who has been sitting down for too long and is now compensating. He spotted his father immediately, crossed the distance between them at a run, and Adrian crouched down to his level, and they had some kind of brief, animated exchange that ended with Noah apparently winning an argument and Adrian laughing. Lena ended her phone call. She sat in her car for a while. She had told herself, several times over the preceding weeks, that she was done thinking about Adrian Mercer and the situation at the hospital. The documentation had been deciphered, the protocol partially reconstructed, the presentation rescheduled, the crisis was managed. There was no operational reason to think about him anymore. But she kept thinking about what he said about the juice boxes. She had spent 17 years building things, departments, systems, efficiencies, quarterly gains. She had a view of the city from her office that cost the hospital quite a lot in commercial rent. She had a refrigerator at home that she had selected because it was the highest-rated model in Consumer Reports, and which currently contained half a block of cheese, some leftovers she didn't remember preparing, and the Bordeaux. There was nothing wrong with her life. She would have said so to anyone who asked. She was fine, but she had not laughed the way Adrian laughed in that parking lot in a very long time, and she was not entirely sure she remembered how. She reached out to the medical supply company about their open contract position. They confirmed Adrian was doing excellent work. She filed that information and told herself she wasn't sure why. Over the following weeks, she found reasons to contact him. Professional reasons, mostly, questions about the monitoring system, small gaps in the documentation that needed clarification. He answered her emails with the professional courtesy of someone who had decided to be gracious without being warm. She didn't blame him for that. Once, she arrived at Westfield for a meeting and found Noah there, sitting in the lobby doing homework on a tablet while Adrian finished up inside. Noah recognized her immediately. He informed her that he had gotten 100% on his spelling test, showed her the graded paper which he was carrying in his backpack specifically in order to show people, and then asked if she wanted to hear about his ongoing project to breed the world's largest imaginary dinosaur through a series of hypothetical evolutionary pressures. She sat down and listened to the dinosaur presentation for 12 minutes. She had not been planning to. She wasn't sure what happened to the plan. Adrian found them there when he came out. He stopped in the doorway, his expression shifted through something complex and settled into something she couldn't quite name. After that, the emails became slightly less formal. Not significantly. Just slightly. One evening in late October, a storm came through the city, real storm weather, the kind with sideways rain and wind that found the gaps in windows. Adrian had a calibration job that ran late and the roads were bad, and by the time he got home and got Noah settled with a book, It was nearly 8 o'clock, and the power had flickered twice. His phone buzzed with a text from Lena asking a documentation question that could genuinely not wait until Monday. He texted back. She responded. The question turned into a conversation, the way conversations sometimes do when both people involved are trying not to notice that they've wandered off the original subject. At some point around 9:30 she wrote, "I owe you an apology that I haven't figured out how to give yet." He didn't respond immediately. She watched the 3 dots appear and disappear twice. Then, "I know, then, what are you trying to figure out about it?" She sat with that for a while. The rain was very loud against her windows, which were large and faced the city and which she had never found as beautiful as people seemed to expect her to. She wrote, "I've been thinking about what you said, about what we were doing to people. I looked back at your shift request. The 90-minute adjustment, I want to tell you it was a mistake, but that would make it sound like it was an accident. It wasn't an accident, it was a choice that the institution made, and that I didn't question and I should have." The 3 dots appeared. "That's the apology," he wrote. "That's not good enough," she wrote back. "No," he agreed. "But it's the beginning of one." There was a pause and then, "Noah's asleep?" She told him she assumed so, she wasn't there. "He went out like a light," Adrian wrote. "He had a big day. We went to the Science Museum on Saturday and he's been processing it ever since." Today's question was whether black holes can get lonely. She sat with that image, an 8-year-old wondering if black holes can get lonely, and felt something move in her chest. She wasn't entirely sure what to do with it. She wrote, "What did you tell him?" "I told him everything in the universe that's big enough, and exists long enough, probably experiences something we don't have a word for yet." He liked that. He thought about it for about 20 seconds and then asked if we could have waffles for dinner. "So?" She was smiling. She realized this after a moment. She almost wrote something small in closing, something that would end the conversation neatly and put them back on professional footing. She started to. And then she deleted it. Instead she wrote, "I've been doing this wrong for a long time. Not just the hospital. Everything. I think I've been trying to be impressive in a direction that isn't going anywhere." The response took a while. She waited. "I know what that feels like," he wrote. "I spent about 6 years trying to be indispensable to an institution, and it turned out that institutions don't actually love you back. People do." She read that sentence 3 times. The storm moved on around midnight. The city went quiet in the way cities go quiet after weather. Everything washed. The air temporarily clean, the streetlights reflecting off water in long shivering lines. 2 weeks later, Lena did something she had been preparing quietly for longer than she'd admitted to herself. She presented to the hospital board a comprehensive proposal for what she called a human infrastructure initiative, a formal restructuring of Whitmore's staffing policies built around the principle that sustainable institutional performance requires treating employees as human beings with lives that matter outside of work hours. So, the proposal included flexible scheduling frameworks, expanded family support resources, a parental accommodation policy with actual teeth, and a transparent promotion rubric designed to stop the practice of louder people taking credit for quieter people's work. The board was skeptical. Some members were very skeptical. One member said, with the confidence of a man who had never worked a clinical shift in his life, that this seemed like a good way to reduce accountability. Lena said, respectfully, that she thought he had the causality backwards, that the current system was what had reduced accountability, by making it more expensive for talented people to stay than to leave. She showed them Adrian's file. She didn't name him. She showed them a decade of exceeds expectations reviews, the commendations, the shift request, and the date of resignation. She showed them the cost of the partner network that had withdrawn after the presentation disaster. She showed them the projected cost of reconstructing his monitoring protocol from documentation rather than from the person who built it. Then she told them she was going to offer his position back, with conditions that made remaining possible. Or she would accept their decision if they disagreed, and they could manage the reconstruction themselves. The board approved the proposal. She drove to Adrian's apartment on a Wednesday evening. She had called ahead this time. He knew she was coming. Noah had apparently been informed as well, because when Lena arrived, he was wearing what he described as his good sweatshirt. It was slightly less paint-stained than the other one, and had prepared a plate of crackers and sliced cheese for the occasion, which he presented with genuine hospitality, and the suggestion that Lena take the one with the most cheese on it, because she was the guest. They sat in the living room, Adrian on the couch, Lena in the armchair that had a slightly uneven leg and rocked gently if you shifted your weight, Noah on the floor among his cardboard city, which had expanded significantly since her last visit. She told Adrian what she had done, the proposal, the board meeting, the approval. She told him what the new position would include. Full authority over the monitoring division, a schedule built around his actual life, profit sharing, and a benefits package that covered Noah's educational expenses through college if he stayed. She told him she wasn't there to sell him on it. She told him she understood if the answer was no, and that she wasn't going to pretend 11 years of doing things wrong could be undone by one good meeting with the board. Adrian was quiet for a while. Noah had stopped pretending to focus on his city and was listening openly, the way children listen when they've decided the conversation matters. "Why are you doing this?" Adrian said finally. Not suspiciously, he just wanted to know. Lena thought about the right answer. She thought about several versions of it. Then she gave him the honest one. "Because I spent 17 years believing the way to run an institution was to make it as efficient as possible," she said. "And I had a very efficient institution, and it lost the most important person in the building, because we wouldn't move his schedule by 90 minutes. And when I drove to your apartment to ask you to come back and fix it, I found you eating dinner with your son." She paused. "I didn't have anyone to eat dinner with, I hadn't in a long time, and I'm not, this isn't about me, but I think the same thing that made me bad at the hospital also made me bad at the rest of it. I'm trying to fix both. The hospital I can fix by policy, the rest of it I'm still working on." It was the most she had said, unscripted in a single stretch in several years. Noah looked up from his cardboard city and said, "My dad says you can't fix things you don't pay attention to." Adrian looked at his son, something moved across his face, pride, affection, a little bit of helplessness. "He's right," Lena said. "I know," Noah said pleasantly, and went back to his city. Adrian looked at Lena for a moment, then he said, "I'm going to think about it." "That's fair," she said. "I want to read the actual policy documents. Not the summary, I'll send them tonight." Noah said without looking up, "She should stay for dinner." There was a pause. "We're having pasta," Noah added in the tone of someone who considers this a selling point. Adrian looked at Lena. Lena looked at Adrian. Something passed between them that neither of them named, partly because Noah was right there, and partly because some things don't need to be named immediately. They just need to be noticed. "I make good pasta," Adrian said. It was a question dressed as a statement. "I don't have anywhere to be," Lena said. She stayed for dinner. Noah ate enthusiastically and talked for most of the meal about his dinosaur project, which had evolved to include a subspecies adapted for underwater volcanic environments. Lena asked questions she was genuinely curious about. Adrian refilled her water glass without being asked, and she noticed that too. They did the dishes together, the three of them, while the city outside went dark and the streetlights came on one by one, and Noah dried bowls with the focused concentration of someone who has recently been promoted to this responsibility and is taking it seriously. Adrian read the policy documents that weekend. He had questions. Lena answered them. He had more questions. She answered those too. He called her on a Sunday evening and they talked for 40 minutes, mostly about the protocol, occasionally about other things. He came back to Whitmore Medical on the first Monday of November. His schedule read 9 to 3:30, with full flexibility for school events, medical appointments, and anything else that came up in the life of a person raising a child. His title was Division Director, Respiratory Monitoring Systems. His office had a window. On his first day back, a colleague who had worked alongside him for 9 years, stopped in the hallway and said, "It got bad without you, I want you to know that." "I know," Adrian said. "We're going to make it better." The monitoring protocol was fully rebuilt and operational within 6 weeks. The 2 remaining partner networks came back. The third sent a message 6 months later expressing interest in reconsidering. The board was pleased. Lena presented the first quarterly results under the new staffing policy, and the numbers were not what most of the board had expected. Retention was up. Costly agency staffing was down. The overtime liability that had been quietly accumulating for years had dropped by 30%. She presented those numbers without saying "I told you so," because she didn't need to. She and Adrian had dinner again, just the two of them, in late November, then again in December. Not dates, or not yet. They were both too careful for that, too worn in the specific places that caution comes from. But something was forming between them, something that neither of them rushed, because neither of them could afford another thing in their lives that moved faster than they could actually understand it. Noah, for his part, had opinions. He expressed them indirectly, the way children do when they're trying to manage adults without being obvious about it. He started asking whether Lena was coming to things. Not in a pointed way. Just in the way that people ask about people they've decided matter. There is a particular kind of healing that doesn't announce itself. It arrives in small installments. In a morning when you wake up and realize you don't remember what you were anxious about, in the moment you find yourself laughing at something small, and it occurs to you that you haven't done that in a while. Adrian had spent nearly 2 years moving through a grief so heavy it had become the weather. Just the permanent condition of the air around him. It didn't leave all at once. It doesn't work that way. But something began to shift, quietly, without fanfare, the way the light changes in a room when someone finally opens a window. Lena began to understand, for the first time in her adult life, that efficiency is not the same thing as value. That the things worth most cannot be measured in the metrics she had been trained to optimize for. That a dinner with a person who asks you real questions and listens to the answers is not a distraction from a meaningful life. It is what a meaningful life is made of. Noah turned 9 in March. They had a small party, a few kids from his class, his Aunt Carla, a couple of neighbors. Lena came. She brought a telescope because Noah had mentioned twice that he wanted to see the moons of Jupiter, and she had written it down. He set it up immediately, with Adrian's help, right there in the middle of the living room, pointing it at a window, at an angle that would definitely not work inside an apartment, but which nobody mentioned because the effort was so earnest. Later, when the kids had all gone and Noah had fallen asleep on the couch with his shoes still on and the telescope standing sentinel in the corner, Lena and Adrian sat at the kitchen table with the remainder of the birthday cake between them and the apartment quiet around them. "He's going to remember this birthday," Lena said. "I think so," Adrian said. A pause. Outside, someone walked by on the sidewalk, footsteps steady and fading. "I want to keep doing this," Lena said. It came out simpler than she'd planned. But simple was what she had. Adrian looked at her for a moment. He was a man who had loved one person completely and lost her, and everything after that had been carrying the weight of that without letting it show. He was also, and this is the part people sometimes forget, in stories about grief, a person who still existed. A person who still woke up every morning and made coffee and braided his son's hair and had opinions about pasta and laughed in parking lots and held the kind of quietness in him that isn't absence but presence. He said, "I want that too." Not a grand declaration, not a speech. Just a man at a kitchen table at the end of a long day saying what was true. Noah slept on the couch with his shoes on. The telescope stood in the corner. The cake was very good, which Noah had specified in advance as a requirement. And the apartment, which had been so quiet for so long in the particular way, apartments are quiet when the people inside them are surviving rather than living. That apartment was not quiet anymore.